Will Jamari Johnson be the go-to tight end for the Louisville Cardinals this fall? And if so, how long will it take for him to get to that level? We'll talk about the tight end and the offensive line positions ahead of next season on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On the Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. It's not a new week of Locked On Louisville coverage if my guy, Grant Mulligan, football analyst of the State of Louisville.com, isn't on the show. Grant, what's going on, man? Happy Monday.
Happy Monday to you. The headset is gone. We got a real mic
upgraded.
now. Had to upgrade for the fans, for the Locked On fans, man. I got a real mic.
Heck yeah, man. Heck yeah. A lot of good stuff to talk about. We're continuing on in the off-season positional preview series. We'll talk about the tight ends and the offensive line positions on today's episode of the show. But before we do that, I don't want to make this seem like, oh, it's tight end, offensive line. Let's combine them. You know, what I really wanted to do is I respect Grant's overall just diagnosis and dissection of the film to where I feel like he does a great job of kind of breaking film down, especially in the trenches. That's kind of why I wanted to include tight end and offensive line together so I could get his takes on both of those. But Grant, nonetheless, big storyline for the tight end room. It's a tight end room that still has some question marks. And it seems like the narrative is that it's going to be Jamari Johnson's spot eventually. Is that going to be day one in that first game against Georgia Tech, or do you think it takes some time?
I think we'll see a lot more storylines about this surrounding fall camp and who's going to get the reps there. I think that camp is going to be our biggest telling factor about how that room is going to transpire. I think Jamari Johnson is a great player. There's been reports of him coming out. He's in better shape than ever. He's 280 pounds.
6'5", 280.
6'5", 280.
Granted, some of the best tight ends in NFL history have been over 260 pounds, but when is the last time Louisville has had a pass catcher over 275 pounds?
We'll see how it transpires. What I saw on his high school tape was a 260-pound player who still had some baby fat on him, who moved like a guy who was 50 pounds lighter. Right. So I'm really excited about him. I'm afraid of crowning him the de facto starter just because he's a true freshman. He's new to college. He's also pretty inexperienced at the position, though he's shown a lot of flashes, and there's plenty of reason to be excited about him as the future. We got to remember that this guy was a quarterback until what's now 3 years ago. He played tight end for 2 years in high school. He balled out, but I think there's going to be a lot of a learning curve at this level for him. I think it's absolutely reasonable to expect him to command a top 2 position in the depth chart against Georgia Tech. We will see him against Georgia Tech. My current opinion is that Josh Lifson will get the start just because of his experience. He already showed some chemistry with Plummer. He caught 2 touchdowns from Plummer in the spring game. Sure, he doesn't have a lot of receiving acumen on his resume, but he's experienced. He's got a more ready-made body. I don't know how long he'll hold on to that starting spot, especially as Jamari Johnson's learning curve begins to come full circle. But I personally would expect Josh Lifson to draw the start week 1, pending that there aren't any shocking roster moves before then.
I felt like coming into the offseason when Jamari enrolled, I felt like, being 260 his senior year, I thought he was going to drop about 20 pounds and play sort of at the 240 range, sort of be in like the Marshawn Ford range. Although Marshawn, a little shorter than Jamari, but to add that weight. Now, I know that there were some college coaches that viewed Jamari Johnson as an offensive lineman, if I'm not mistaken, as a high school prospect.
Be a waste of talent, but
It definitely
I can see it from a physical profile and
yeah, but
athleticism.
it would
I can
definitely
see
be a
it.
waste of talent. But I wonder, is this something that kind of concerns you? Now we've seen it done, granted, multiple times in NFL history. Granted, this is the top of the top. But do you expect him to lose any of that speed and that athleticism, gaining 20 extra pounds, going from 260 to 280?
What excites me about the weight gain, and I know it's strange to talk about a player gaining 20 pounds and talk about excitement. If you look at his body composition in high school, when you turn on the tape, you look at how he appeared from a physical perspective. A lot of it was, like I said, that baby fat. He still had to transform his frame a little bit. I saw a lot more fat on his frame in high school, and we're now starting to get into that physical range where he's turning fat to muscle. So I think his weight will come down as when he's not balancing as much fat and muscle.
Think it'll
At the
come down
current
in
time.
season.
I think he'll play. I don't think this 280 is out of shape. I think we're looking at a 280 that's more in shape than the 260.
Than he was at 260, just
Yes,
adding that, it's just
muscle,
the byproduct of adding that muscle to
right, and getting
you have
into
to
a college
you
strength
have to
program.
bulk it to cut it.
Absolutely, and that's just it's the nature of it. He's making the full time transition to tight end, and he's building his body like a college tight end, and a lot of his frame is pro ready. Or college ready, maybe even pro ready. Shoot, but I think we're going through a transition period for him from a physical standpoint. I'm not largely concerned about it. I feel I have great confidence in the strength and training staff and their ability to get him shaped up right. I wasn't largely concerned about him coming in. I knew it was going to be a transition once he got here. I saw how he played with baby fat. And I think him with muscle is going to be even more impressive, especially in the blocking game. So I don't think it's something to get too concerned about. I don't think it's something to fret about with his ability to play or slow down. I think the weight will balance itself out once he gets his composition right, and we'll see that as the season draws closer.
So there's a ton of uncertainty at the tight end position. Obviously, losing Francis Sherman, Des Melton, both to the transfer portal. You have some unproven guys that are just now playing the position, like Joey Gatewood. And it doesn't seem like, barring an unexpected addition to the unit. I mean, we're at June 26th, so I guess it's possible, but probably not likely at this point. And if it is, it's probably not one of those groundbreaking moves to where that player comes in right away and is the de facto, number one option at tight end. But regardless, you mentioned Josh Lifson and how he could possibly start. Regardless of where he's at on the depth chart, what do you think that Jamari Johnson's role is for Jeff Brohm's offense early on Labor Day weekend?
I think we're going to look at him in almost exclusively a pass catching role. I guess his biggest question mark coming out of high school was his blocking ability, which is a natural question given the transition from quarterback to tight end. The receiving ability is going to come a lot more natural than the blocking ability is, and that's going to come with experience, and they're going to give him opportunities to get in there and learn. But his skill set is that of a very productive receiving threat from the tight end perspective from day one. So I see coming out week one, I think he's going to get utilized. I don't know how many targets he's going to get, how many catches he's going to get, but I think he's going to get looks. I think they're going to draw some stuff up for him. He's a mismatch you want to take advantage of, and I think that we're going to see him come in, maybe some 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets, using some play action game, get him as the second tight end out there. It's really exciting to think about how he could get utilized in this offense. But I'm thinking early in his career, they're probably going to try to protect him from some blocking situations if they can, just to help with that learning curve, unless he makes tremendous progress in the spring and fall when they get him out in camp and they feel comfortable with that. But I would see him largely as brought in known passing situations, or in the play action game, or in a pretty receiving heavy role, and trying to protect him a little bit on the blocking side.
I agree there. I think that he's going to play some sort of a role. It's probably going to be to his strengths. Might take him a little bit to become that number one overall tight end on the team due to the pass blocking, run blocking, whatever you want to call it, whatever situation. So that is really a perfect segue into where Louisville is projecting the tight end to go, or to start, I should say. Both you and I seem like we have the 1-2 pretty, pretty similar. Josh Lifson 1 and Jamari Johnson 2. We'll talk about the full depth chart in our opinions, respectively, here in a moment after we talk about our friend and the title sponsor of the show, FanDuel. Baseball season is in full swing. There's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, new customers getting no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if that first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. And there's a lot of benefits to using FanDuel. It has daily promotions, which makes a very fun betting atmosphere. Quick, immediate withdrawals and deposits, and it's on a safe and secure platform. So a lot of great things. Don't miss your chance to snag a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel is the official partner of Major League Baseball. Heading on into the second segment of the show with my good friend, football recruiting and overall football analyst of the State of Louisville.com, Grant Mulligan, discussing tight end depth chart predictions. It seems like him and I both have Josh Lifson 1, Jamari Johnson 2. We talked about Jamari Johnson, but Josh Lifson had a pretty solid spring. Is he still a walk-on? Is Lifson still a walk-on?
I am not certain of his.
I haven't seen
scholarship
anything
status
that has alluded to him being put on scholarship, which sometimes with scholarships available, you could see that happen in fall camp, which he's definitely a candidate to be put on scholarship. But as of right now, a walk-on turned potential first string. I thought that he had a pretty solid chemistry with the Louisville quarterbacks in spring ball. I had a lot of people raving about his abilities, made some plays in the spring game as well. What's your take on this position for Lifson? Do you think it's one of those to where even if he's number one on the depth chart, if Jamari overtakes that he's still a guy that's going to play significantly through the season?
I think so. I think that with how inexperienced this room is, they're going to lean on one of the very few guys who have some experience at the position here. Josh, I don't think we're ever going to see fall out of the rotation barring injury. I think that he's going to be there all 12, all 13 games. I think we can expect him to be a steady presence, even if he isn't starting. Brohm utilizes that 12 personnel in his offense. He's going to be that second tight. Even if he's not the number one tight end out there, he's going to be the number two. They're going to be running that offense. They'll need him to help and run support and run blocking. But he's also shown in the spring that he's trusted to be used as a receiving weapon as well when called upon. I don't expect him to be a volume target, nor do I expect him to put up yards and touchdowns in mass, but I could be wrong. I'd love to be wrong, but I think he could be a steady and reliable presence, both for his quarterback and as a blocker, and also give some leadership and mentorship to the room. I like where he's at, even if not a starter, but as a rotational guy.
I agree with that assessment. I'm going to let you take the reins on who you think is third on the depth chart. I have an extremely hot take as to who that's going to be, but I'm interested to hear who's number 3 on your depth chart.
I am going, this is just personal feel, I'm going to say Nate Kariski.
Okay.
That's where I've got my third guy on the chart. I feel good about where he's at from a physical perspective. I believe this would be year 2 for him. Sticking around with the staff. He's a pure tight end. He's not a guy that you have to take as a quarterback and make into a tight end. I'm not sure about how high his upside is, but I do feel that given the current state of the room, his skill set, at least what his skill set was coming out of high school, lends himself to that third role, coming in as needed, maybe spell a few reps. Hopefully he's gotten to work with the staff, add some improvements to his overall game, maybe become more of a versatile weapon to be called upon. But that, just from a body type perspective, what he brings from a physical perspective, as well as at least some relative youth, maybe some untapped potential, I'm going to go with Kariski as my number 3.
I think that that's a good option. I also think that I wouldn't be surprised to see a guy like Joey Gatewood, just due to the receiving upside there. Like I keep coming back to this Trey Burton comparison that I keep thinking about. Like I said, I don't think it's probable, but definitely possible. Dwayne Martin is another veteran that has been a part of this program. You and I talked before the recording, a very talented athletic player who was the Mr. Football in the state of South Carolina in high school, played running back, played a couple of different positions. For me, number 3 is Chris Bell. I think that Chris Bell is, when we've heard some talks about him potentially playing some tight end here, and I think that with the depth chart as crowded as it is, I mean, you have Jamari Thrash who's going to get his targets. You've got guys like Amari Huggins-Bruce, Kevin Coleman Jr., Jimmy Callaway, Jaden Thompson. The list goes on, Grant. And Chris Bell is one of those guys that I personally think is talented enough to get some targets in this offense. And I'm smiling because it's as hot of a take as I would give this offseason. And if I'm wrong, then I don't give a damn. It's third string. It is what it is. Yeah. But I think that Chris Bell is as talented enough to be in this rotation in a situation where I could see Jeff Brohm looking at him like Scott Satterfield once looked at Marshawn Ford and said, he's athletic enough to go up against opposing defensive backs, and he's strong enough to go up against opposing linebackers. Let's see if we can't get him the ball in a bunch of situations. Now, when he's on the field, is it going to look like he's in a tight end set? Probably not. Probably more so, an H-back, if you will, to where you're getting him the ball out in space, where I don't necessarily know that he's a traditional blocker, but I do think he's a player that has that athleticism, is one of those guys that's just waiting for his turn. And I do feel like that we've heard enough about him in the past couple off seasons to where if you're going to, go from wide receiver to tight end with the frame that he has, this is the room to do it in. There's a lot of uncertainty. You have a walk-on starting, no disrespect to Josh Lifson because he's going to be pretty solid. You have a true freshman right behind him. Outside of that, Nate Kariski really hasn't shown much. Joey Gatewood is also making the transition to tight end. And then you have Dwayne Martin, who has been a fringe rotational guy. So essentially, I'm not saying he's going to beat out Lifson and Johnson, but I'm saying that, okay, if Chris Bell's going up against Gatewood, Kariski, and Dwayne Martin, no disrespect to either of those three, but I think that if you can continue to transform Bell's body, you have a spot to where it's like, okay, how do we get this guy on the field and exploit mismatches?
I think you make a very exciting.
Assuming, last thing I'll say, assuming that is the case, there has been rumors. If that's not the case, then just forget I even said anything. But it seems like I've heard from a couple different places that Louisville may look to use him at tight end in some situations just to get him on the field.
I wouldn't blame him from an offensive perspective. I mean, he's more ready built to play that position than anybody else in the wide receiver room. He's got a thick lower half. He can, he's got a lot of the big physical presence. And similarly to Johnson, he would offer a lot in the receiving game.
I'd be interested at 6'2", 225, so he's probably going to add a little bit more weight. But I mean, that's a good foundation to build upon for the future. Like I said, I don't see him in pass blocking situations much, but definitely out in open field, things of that nature.
I'd be excited to see it, but this room is lacking run blocking, especially if we go that way. But I'm more concerned about this room's ability to block than I am about the receiver.
I agree, and that is one portion of the puzzle to be able to put together. But I do think we're going to see more 2 tight end sets, maybe more often than not, because of Brohm's ability to creatively draw up mismatches. And I think that if you have players in the tight end room that possess that mismatch ability, that makes things very interesting. So tight end room definitely up in the air. Another position group that's up in the air is the offensive line. Jeff Brohm and company overhauled the room and completely addressed all of the needs. So we're going to try to do the impossible. We're going to try to predict the 2 deep for the offensive line, going position by position, beginning with left tackle. We'll discuss here in a moment. I do want to thank you all again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the show is free on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Throughout the week, we're going to continue on into our positional preview series. discussing the defensive side of the ball after this episode. So be sure to stay tuned. All right, Grant. Final segment of the show, we're discussing the offensive line room. It seemed like after the spring game, it seemed like the Cardinals had their work cut out for them. And their 2-week stretch of getting guys to commit at the position was absolutely nuts, to where it went from a very sort of inexperienced room at position to now a very veteran-led bunch, to where you're kind of wondering, okay, who's going to be the odd man out here? So let's go position by position. Left tackle, who's your starter? Who's your backup?
I feel like this one's one of the easier ones to project out of the newcomer. I feel really happy about the commitment of Eric Miller, former tackle, former starting tackle for Purdue. He's familiar with the offense. He's familiar with Jack Plummer. He's familiar with the staff. He was very solid, very experienced, seasoned, offers some great veteran leadership to the room. It's not often that tackle with that much starting experience or that much experience in general is available in the portal, and getting one that's familiar with your staff and your offense is even better. I really like Eric Miller at left tackle here. I think that was a huge win in the portal. After him, I would have to say Willie Tyler, Yep. So he's got a good physical profile. He's a big boy, 6'6", 320, 330. He's got the physical stature to play multiple positions along the line. He could absolutely contend for a starting spot, especially if this group wasn't so loaded with transfers. But at the very worst, I think it'll be a very quality backup.
I agree there. I think that it for me, Eric Miller is the clear-cut starter in my opinion, but Willie Tyler is definitely going to contend there. Moving over to left guard, I think that this is where it gets interesting, because you could put Michael Gonzalez on the left or the right. I'm going to slide him into the left for now. I mean, it could flip. Right guard might be where he fits better. Which do you feel like Michael Gonzalez fits better, or does it matter?
For me, it doesn't matter a lot. I think Gonzalez is the most versatile offensive line piece we have. I have him starting at a different spot. Spoiler alert, I have him starting at right guard. Okay, I think
that's kind of where I'm kind of where I'm at. I mean, I think, put it this way, I think John Paul Flores and Michael Gonzalez are going to be interchangeable at the left and right guard. So that, in my opinion, that's where those two are. After them is where it kind of gets a little interesting. I think left guard, honestly, I could see Madden Sanker
getting who I have
to that left guard spot, because of, him being one of the highest offensive line recruits ever in program history. So I think that Sanker is, going to rise in there. At right guard, though, who's the backup to Michael Gonzalez, in your opinion?
I'm going to go interesting pick here. I'm going to say Vincent Lumia, the transfer.
There we go.
The former,
you and I are pretty much right in
I thought that was going to be hot. I thought that was going to be a hot take.
And he played a lot of tackle at times at Duquesne, but make no mistake about it, he played all over the line, and I think that versatility is something that's going to help him. But a veteran-led guy, Josh Black, is another guy that could be, in this opportunity as well. So,
right guard is the only spot I went to 3. I had Michael Gonzalez, Vincent Lumia, Josh Black 3.
I gotcha. That makes some sense. Now, it feels like it's pretty obvious who's behind Brian Hudson, but I want to hear who you have as the backup center.
I have it at Austin Collins, as most people would have. He hasn't seen a lot of game action, local kid. I think he absolutely came up big in some spots when they needed him. I think landing in that backup role and continuing to develop as a center is great for him. But nobody's unseating Brian Hudson. He's one of the best centers, not just in the conference, but in the country. I'm super excited to see him for his final year. I'm thinking he's playing for draft capital here. I think I can't wait to see where he ends up. I'm super, super high on Brian, and I cannot wait to see him lead that offensive line in his final season.
Right tackle is an interesting situation, because this is the first one that I have player X or player Y. I think that Renato Brown or Lance Robinson is at the right tackle spot. I think that Lance, it's hard to say that he's the better player, but I mean, I really like what I heard from people over at Houston when they talked about Lance Robinson, but Renato Brown has gotten better each and every season. And I feel like being the veteran for this team, maybe, game one, this is a situation to where does Lance Robinson have enough time in fall camp to overtake Renato Brown at the right tackle spot? So at this point in time, it's kind of foggy. I'm putting the or tag on this.
I'm not putting the or tag here. I'm going with the only real hot take I've got. I'm thinking Lance Robinson takes it. I'm thinking new staff, no loyalty. Not no loyalty, but yeah, they
don't have
Renato Brown wasn't
previous
their starting right tackle. They have no previous relationship.
Sure.
Very appreciative of what Brown has done. I think even if he doesn't win the right tackle spot, I think he can make a legitimate push for the starting right guard spot. But I personally have Lance Robinson as the week one starter at right tackle.
That's fair enough. I think that is definitely one of those situations to where there's a lot of different ways that Richard Owens can go. And I feel like at the end of the day, it's really up to seeing what happens at the end. Actually, I believe that there's some other guys that could also be in the mix. If you had to pick a player or two that you felt like is not being talked about a lot, but maybe by the end of the season they're seeing some decent time, who would it be?
Okay. I think that
I know I put you on the spot.
Yeah, you did. I think if any of our freshmen have a chance to get any type of significant playing time,
I think it's Luke Burgess.
You think it's Luke Burgess?
I think
over Sanker.
I mean, what I mean is a guy that we're not talking about.
Okay.
We've been talking about Sanker a good amount, and I'm going to say Luke Burgess as one of those guys.
Lumia, I don't think gets enough talk. I know we mentioned him, but you look across the board, and aside from his initial commitment, I don't see him getting a lot of.
There hasn't been a lot of love for him, and also for Trevante Sylvester as well.
Right, that's a name that has gone absolutely dark since.
And I think that he's more so of a future depth piece. Sylvester being, I think, the only non-grad transfer coming in of the offensive line bunch, but I mean, who knows to where he ends up this season. But nonetheless, Grant, I feel like Jeff Brohm deserves a round of applause here because it seemed like in that spring game, I understand it's a spring game, but the offensive line really wasn't all that great.
Agreed.
And they went out and they got like 5 to 6 dudes that played a good amount of snaps at their previous spots for multiple seasons. So, I mean, you're potentially best case scenario, and I think it's pretty realistic, a top 5 unit in the ACC.
I don't think that's unreasonable at all. And on paper, this is the deepest offensive line we have had in a very long time.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, not just top-end guys.
Well, Bobby 2.0 didn't believe in recruiting offensive linemen.
No, he did not.
Satterfield did what he could to, replenish the cupboard. But even then, I think that this is incredible to say the least.
Absolutely.
But that's going to wrap up the conclusion of the offensive position preview series. We just talked about the tight ends and the offensive linemen. Grant, appreciate you tuning in. Appreciate you joining in for this episode of the show. For those who aren't aware, he's going to be a weekly guest in August moving forward, which really, I mean, he's a weekly guest as it is, so we can just kind of call it how it is. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of the show. Everyone have a great start to your week. We'll see you right back here pretty soon. And if you need to find us on all of your socials, I keep forget to doing this, but check us out.